if we can make a start on our next session. And I'll just remind delegates, please, to keep their mobile telephones switched off, please. That would be very helpful and very respectful to our speakers. Thank you. Right, we have an excellent session coming up now. Two international speakers with us this morning for a very exciting session. Our first speaker is Professor Nancy Cassill. Dr. Cassill has been a member of the faculty of the Department of Textile and Apparel Technology and Management in the College of Textiles at North Carolina State University since May 2000. Prior to this, for 15 years, she was at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and the University of North Texas. She holds degrees from Purdue University, Indiana University, and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. She has published numerous articles in research and trade journals, and often speaks to industry groups on international textile marketing and globalization issues, as well as consumer issues. In addition, she has worked with industry representing the product pipeline, with fibre producers, fabric manufacturers, sewn product manufacturers, retailers, and consulting groups. She provides a theoretical and real-world perspective to the numerous global challenges facing our textile and apparel industries. Dr. Cassill served as president of the International Textile and Apparel Association in 1997 to 98. She's currently serving as education director for the Southeastern USA Apparel Manufacturers Association, as well as a member of the Technical Advisory Board for INDA, the Non-Wovens Industry Association. So we're extremely privileged today to have Professor Cassill with us, and I hope that you will enjoy her talk. Dr. Cassill.
I'd like to begin first by saying what a pleasure it is to be here in Egypt, and especially in Cairo. This is my first visit to Egypt, and I have truly enjoyed meeting the persons not only here at the conference, but in the marketplace, and enjoying the culture, the Egyptian culture as well. So thank you for your warm hospitality, for those of you that this is your home country and your home city. It's an honor to present this plenary session today related to a topic that is most important, which is globalization of the textile and apparel industries. At North Carolina State University, I share the expertise in terms of globalization, specifically related to global sourcing, international trade, as well as global textile business dynamics, with a focus on international marketing. In that role, I interface regularly with multinational organizations representing the fiber producers, mills, manufacturers, and retailers, as well as not only share but read extensively in the trade and research publications. So I'll use that framework as I share information with you today related to this topic. In almost every session that we have had, that I've attended here at the Textile Institute Conference, we have heard the phrase globalization or some form of globalization or global challenges being mentioned. In addition, as I interface with industry executives throughout the world, we also hear the same connotation of the same phrase or concept being mentioned. So what I want to do today is share with you some perspectives, not only of where we've been in the past, where we are today, but specifically what we need to do in terms of moving forward with globalization. And then finally talk briefly about a process to help us move forward as well. There are many common definitions of globalization that not only do we hear, but we read in terms of how globalization is defined. In some cases, we see more of an economic definition of globalization, where people will refer to the world as becoming one global economy. Others, in addition, use more of a production orientation, where they will use the phrase that globalization is a fully integrated network of production, that the world is not just a single market, but it truly is broken into heterogeneous or smaller markets or niche markets. While others talk about globalization from more of a trade perspective, and they will refer to globalization as occurring when national borders lose their significance as barriers. And in that definition, they talk in terms of the movement of goods and services throughout the world, but also the factors of production that are available related to our industry. Well, all three of these definitions, of course, are accurate, and they are beliefs that you will hear both industry as well as university and government personnel using the definitions. The reality, however, is that there's a globalization dilemma. And what we talk about as individuals, as industry, and as government, and what we believe in terms of the definitions of globalization are accurate. But the reality is that for individuals and industry, we tend to carry on our political life related to globalization within the framework of our individual nation states. And so we really have this dilemma related to globalization, because what we believe and what our actions are at two ends of the continuum. And so for that reason, we truly have some strategies as well as globalization implementations that we need to undertake. Today, my presentation outline for the next 30 minutes will be composed of 4 components. I'm going to briefly just update you or provide you a framework, a historical framework about the 3 driving forces of globalization that have brought us to the year 2002. I'm going to then follow with the challenges and the opportunities for those industries and companies that have seized these globalization opportunities, but share with you the challenges and opportunities that globalization is providing. But then I'm going to spend the most time sharing with you what I believe are 10 propositions to help us all, industry, government, and academics, move forward and really close the link between our beliefs and our actions so that we can take these propositions, address them in our curriculum, in our organizations, whether they happen to be government or industry or trade associations. And then finally, I want to share with you a very brief process of how, in fact, we can take the 10 propositions and move those forward. Okay, first, let me give you a very brief background for the driving forces of globalization. As I'm sure you're very aware, in the late 1940s, following World War II, was the emergence of GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. With GATT, we know that GATT was formed, in essence, or the goal of GATT was to liberalize world trade. And it was based on the 3 principles of reciprocity, non-discrimination, and transparency. Since the late 1940s, we have had several rounds in terms of trade negotiations, and thus GATT has been elevated to the level of the World Trade Organization, furthering over time the reduction of trade barriers in terms of enhancing globalized trade. A second driving force, in addition to the first, but happening concurrently over time, has been the emergence or the end of the Cold War. And with the emergence of the Cold War, what this allowed us to do as a world economy was truly look beyond the centrally planned economies and the market economies, and truly operate on a global basis more in terms of an open market economy. Now, we know that there are a few exceptions that still exist in the world, but that really laid the platform in terms of accelerating the globalization aspect, especially related to global trade. The third driving force of globalization has been the revolution in information technology. And this revolution in information technology has brought about several changes. Most significantly related to globalization has been the economic transactions and the ease of economic transactions in terms of conducting global business, coupling that with the cost of transactions in terms not only of time, but financial capital, the cost in terms of the decline of financial capital, but in terms of reduction of time, yielding theoretically a much easier way in terms of dealing with the global marketplace, and truly being able to, in theory, maximize this global integrated system of production. That's just a very brief background or history in terms of globalization. But let's fast forward to the year 2002. We know that we continue to hear buzzwords related to globalization, competitive challenge, mode of productions. So let's look where we are in terms of a global textile and apparel industry, as well as government, and then also think about, for those educators, where our academic programs are at the time. Okay, current challenges and opportunities related to globalization are many. And for the most part, when you hear globalization challenges mentioned, more than likely they relate to one component, which is economic. Now, economic is very important and it's multidimensional, so I'm going to start with economic first. But you also need to be aware and frame globalization challenges and opportunities from not only just economic perspectives, but social and political perspectives as well as cultural perspectives. To begin with, I also want to mention that challenges can be translated into monumental problems for many or for some organizations. But we do have some of our global industry that has tackled challenges and has really seized the moment in terms of the opportunities. So I don't want you to think about these as being more theoretical and they're occurring but no one is resolving the problems. And I think there are many examples of companies that are resolving some of the challenges that I'll lay out. I want to begin first with economic challenges. And one of the first examples relates to competition, and it's competition on a global basis. As we know, for many of our international companies, not only the cost of capital, but the ease in terms of accruing capital remains one of the largest challenges that our textile and apparel industry has. But what happens in terms of competition on a global basis is that this has sparked the increased need to dedicate or devote resources to research and development. And I know one of my colleagues, Munsa, talked about this issue yesterday in the plenary session. What should happen, and what does happen in many cases, is that the allocation of research and development translates into technological innovations, both in terms of technology as well as in terms of products. But one upshot of our technological innovations has been the shorter product life cycle. And again, not only speed to market, but the shorter product life cycle presents some real significant business challenges for our global industry. A second economic challenge has been the change in the dominant mode of production. We find companies, and I know Dr. Oxenham and other colleagues at North Carolina State, and myself as well, spend a lot of time in industry, talking with industry executives and observing the operations, as well as discussing or dialoguing with them in terms of strategies and processes that are being used. What has happened with the expanded or the change in the modes of production is that we're finding a movement away from mass production to more in terms of the personalization of mass customization on the other end of the continuum. And we had a session this morning related to that very issue. We find all kinds of other offshoots from the change of the mode of production. And we find offshoots in terms of market strategies such as niche strategies as well that relate to this. The reality is outsourcing has become extremely affordable and a viable option for many companies in our supply chain to use. My graduate student in helping me prepare this got rather fancy with some of the visuals as well. The third economic challenge relates to the changes in the division of labor. And as we think about some of the changes in the division of labor, we know that not only has global sourcing become more economical, but we find that we truly are re-examining as an industry the definition of specialization. The specialization is no longer dedicated to just perhaps one nation. It's no longer just the property of one company. But we're finding with the division of labor that there are multiple competitors in terms of offering areas of specialization, not only in terms of specific products, but also in the modes of production, full package opportunities that some of the companies on a global basis are offering. In addition to this division of labor, we have some additional challenges as well. Not only understanding specialization and making decisions in terms of what individual companies' specializations will be, but also this global standard for quality standards. Because we know the importance in terms of the quality, not only in the intrinsic product, but the quality in terms of the logistics, the delivery of the product and or the service becomes very important as well. The fourth economic challenge and opportunity for some relates to the growth and wealth and prosperity for the world. What happens, as I mentioned earlier, is that transaction costs have been declined or have declined because of information technology. And in part, this has created a more efficiency in terms of the global economy output, which in fact has, in theory, created for some product categories within our industry an increase in output. The challenge, however, while we look at the increase in output as being a positive, as we've had more global competitors, this has made for a more intense competitive marketplace as well. Which leads us to the next and the final economic challenge and opportunity. Business cycles and business models, as we've known in the past, have been reinvented. Some even question whether or not we have business cycles. And I heard a presentation 2 days ago that talked about the normal business cycle or product life cycle for a particular category was this length of time, followed by this length of time, and now it's a much shorter length of time as well. And so this issue in terms of cycles, models, and reinvention has created some businesses to talk with us in terms of, can you give me an example or a simulation in terms of what a business model looks like? And we respond of it's reinventing itself on a continual basis. Let me briefly mention some of the social and political challenges and opportunities. We find structures of organizations, the old organizational structures that companies previously had in terms of the multi-layered organizations have become flat. We have found, because of the complexities of globalizations, that we find the CEO is more of a coordinator, hopefully less bureaucracy, more of a participatory, because as you're expanding your reach within the marketplace, needing more participation by more persons. In addition, we find some interesting but changing roles in terms of where we're looking at those countries and areas within the world, as well as organizations that we have a strong reliance on. And finally, we're finding within the social and political the growing interdependence among nations, the movement of goods, as well as the need to understand the political coalitions that are taking place. 2 weeks ago in my class in international trade, I brought in an industry executive from VF Corporation, which is one of the world's largest apparel companies that I know does extensive sourcing of apparel products here in Egypt. And she gave a one of many examples in terms of what's occurring, where in fact the design idea occurs in the United States. The sourcing for at least one of their products of denim fabric occurs in China. The manufacturing is in Bangladesh. The product is shipped back to a distribution center in a large metropolitan area in the United States for retail in Canada. And so you can see how you've got to have that movement of goods as well as the political coalitions in place. Let's not forget, though, however, we have a real issue in terms of globalization relating to cultural issues. We have an issue related to what we'll call the new global culture. We have always had this pursuit in terms of information, but this was an issue that came up in the previous session, where in fact, are we maybe making our markets and our products more homogeneous with some of the technologies that we're looking at? And are we perhaps not capitalizing on some market opportunities because of changing global cultures? Tying in with that is the whole rule of law. And with the rule of law, we find that one of the rules of law that we hear a lot about in terms of violations relates to human conduct and relationships. But rules of law are changing, but also requiring organizations to be more in terms of up-to-date and flexible and have a wonderful understanding of what global law is telling us related to our products. In addition, we find global business activities and the issue of efficiency are creating some real challenges. For example, in the United States, we traditionally have thought earlier on, in terms of the majority of trade early on in our industry, more transatlantic, and now trans-Pacific, as well as both transatlantic, trans-Pacific, as well as maximizing opportunities within North and South America. Well, I've given you a brief overview, and I do want to share with you 10 propositions or takeaways that you can take back to your universities, government facilities, or individual companies. What do we do with this information? We know 2005 is hovering, and we have heard the statement that if you haven't planned for 2005, in 2002 you probably have already missed out. Well, it's a given. Increased competition has not only occurred, it's here to stay, and it's going to accelerate, especially with the use of information technology. We need to be training our students for future leaders. We need to be organizing our companies in terms of preparing for and addressing shorter product life cycles and the cost effectiveness of new products and product development, as well as some of the technologies of niche markets and personalization of our products. The second proposition that I would propose to you is get to know the concept of outsourcing. Outsourcing in terms of not only what the strategies are, but some of the key concepts. For example, in the United States, outsourcing occurs not only within the borders, but also across the borders and in multiple directions. So you think in terms of outsourcing not only in terms of your products, but your production processes. Proposition 3, expanding demand. And expanding demand related not only to products and services. With our textile and apparel industry, often we become very myopic or narrow-minded in terms of thinking only of our products. But we know there are many examples in terms of where our services, the expectations of our customers, are that we will provide service programs. For example, many retail organizations, global retail organizations, are requiring select programs, not only data mining programs, but customer service programs. Walmart, one of the world's largest retailers, is very adamant in terms of offering category management programs, which puts a sizable burden on the manufacturer vendor. But again, if one manufacturer vendor cannot provide that, then they will look to another source to provide those services, which give them access to valuable data, sales data, as well as product planning data. I also encourage you to think about creative products and end uses. If you're in the textile industry, think about the end uses in the medical areas as well as the home textile area, the automotive area, as well as the apparel area. We're finding some real innovative product opportunities occurring, for example, with nonwovens, which we have a large nonwovens area at NC State. Not only in the consumer market and the medical market with products such as wipes or towelettes, but yesterday Dr. Siam shared with us the pair of pants that had been woven of nonwoven products as well. Proposition 4. Let's think about innovation in all operations. Innovation management is a buzzword, and many times we think about innovation management. We have been, as an industry, fairly good in terms of innovation management from a production and production processes. But innovation management also relates to product design and development. It also relates to some of the production processes, as well as marketing processes, as well as management processes. But the key here is to think not only of those individual processes, but the integration of all of those processes as well. As we know, knowledge is power, but the knowledge is being able to have your product and your marketing and your production people working together, going into companies, representing your organization and the capabilities that are possible. Proposition 5, trade. Thinking in terms of trade, not only from the national government or the local government level, but regional governments, including trading blocs, multinational institutions, but again, not forgetting your local governments and the issues that are facing within your individual country. Proposition 6. September 11th was a very unfortunate event. What it has forced our industry to do is to re-examine the impact of our industry and its products, but to truly impact in terms of how our products, how trade with our products are impacted by not only peace times as well as war times. North Carolina is home to a very large hosiery industry, and our hosiery industry in North Carolina produces over 52% of all hosiery products that are available in the North American marketplace. It's a given that in recessionary times, perhaps also accompanied with peace times, that sock products sell as one of the top categories within department and mass channels. During war times, our hosiery industry has found some interesting outputs and implications for their products in terms of, for example, sheer hosiery products that found their way into the Gulf War, in terms of protection of some of the guns that were being used there. But beyond just peace and war times and the impact, we're finding that it directly impacts the nature of the product design and the development, whether it's used for aesthetic, or products are designed for aesthetic, utility, efficiency, or function. We only have to look in terms of the events transpiring since September 11th at the impact and the attention given to military apparel. Proposition 7. I'd like for you to think in terms of the new global culture, which was talked about at one of the earlier sessions. What is happening is that traditionally textile products have been known, and a small percentage of textile products have been known more in terms of combining products that had ethnic fashion, or fashion that were related to a particular culture. But as we find the meshing of people not only moving or traveling around the world, but the movement of persons in globalization, this has given rise to some exciting market opportunities in terms of what we're calling folkloric or ethnic fashion that's occurring in not only apparel end uses, but also in some of our other end uses in the home textiles area and even in the automotive textile area as well. I also want to remind you that this idea of global culture and ethnic fashion is occurring in trade legislation. It's not completely understood, but our Trade and Development Act of 2000 included a category known as folkloric apparel, and special provisions or entrees that were allowed into the U.S. marketplace of this folkloric apparel. And so we're finding more and more of a commitment by our government officials, and so as an industry there's an opportunity to provide some of those products that are in demand, not only from the consumer point of view, but offers some trade advantages for companies. Proposition 8. smart textiles, and we've had a few sessions during this conference that have addressed this very issue. We are very interested in terms of not only the creation of new information and technologies, but we think in terms of smart textiles, in terms of the electro-textiles or the nanotechnologies. And we know that a considerable amount of this is taking place. The focus, from what I understand, has been predominantly in terms of fibers and fabrics. And we're only hopeful that these issues and this product development can continue. In one of the sessions yesterday, we addressed some of the environmental issues related and the care issues related. But I also want you to think in terms of smart textiles relating to some of the components being used in smart textiles, related to labeling, product identification systems, because I think you're going to find the idea of smart textiles transferring in terms of not only the product itself, but also in terms of the packaging components and the logistics components. And in our discussions with a global label manufacturer, they are in the product development stages in terms of product identification systems with labeling and embedding care requirements as well as product identification within the fibers and fabrics. Get to know that technology. Proposition 9 is the set of rules. And we know that as we look at globalization, we have got to continually stay abreast of the set of rules and the legal environment that we're all facing. At NC State in the spring, we have an attorney teaching a course called Legal Aspects of Textiles. He's covering issues that confront all of us, not only in the academic community, but in industry. Issues related to product specifications, trademark infringement, licensing, sourcing documents, labeling, environmental standards, and many other issues. And finally, Proposition 10, we're looking at new centers of business activities. We know where some of the traditional centers of business activities have been in developed countries, as well as in developing countries. We've heard at this conference about the industry in Egypt in particular. I traveled in Korea last June and heard government and industry executives talking about how Korea was positioning themselves as a key textile business center by the year 2020, and how they have built their infrastructure and continue to build their infrastructure to address that very issue so that they can become the textile business center by that particular year. Let's get to know those business centers, find out the activities that are taking place, visit those centers, and maximize the services that they can offer. I've given you 10 propositions that I hope you can use some of those to take forward back to your institutions, businesses, and organizations. How do we do this? Well, I profess nothing real creative, but it's going to require the interchange between education, industry, and government. But with that, I'd like to give you some things to think about, because many times we think in terms of this interface as perhaps more narrowly focused. Let's think about the liaisons, and obviously conferences are one way, but liaisons, collaborations, and strategic partnerships, we use those terms and a lot, or we hear those terms a lot. The key is the way that we approach globalization is creative problem solving. So I'll close by sharing with you 3 C's. 1, I encourage us all to communicate. Educators communicate with each other, but let's communicate across our boundaries, education and industry and government as well. The 2nd C, let's collaborate. Let's collaborate in terms of our educational programs. Educators offer the opportunity in terms of distance education. Research findings and presentations and learnings are very important as well. And the 3rd C is let's accept change as a positive and a can-do attitude in terms of how we're going to accomplish this as we look to the year 2005 and beyond. Finally, I would say to you that these are exciting as well as challenging times. The world is one global economy. There is a fully integrated network of production. The national borders and the barriers on those national borders have been broken down, and so globalization is very much of a reality. And I challenge all of us to not only develop the strategy, but put into place the implementation to make us not only maintain our individual organizations, but build those as we look toward the future. Thank you for your time.
Well, I think we thank Dr. Cassill for an excellent paper and some terrific propositions for our future, and maybe even for it to help us use our 3 C's.